Good morning, my friends. We are continuing with our Ananda way of life based on the guidelines for Ananda members of the Sevaka order. So let's begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your living presence within, to move through this world in constant awareness that you are right beside us, whispering, speaking aloud, showing us the way, lighting the path. Help us to walk with confidence and clarity and courage in your company into the light. Om. Peace. Amen. So, my friends, yesterday we finished the Sevaka vow, the Sadhaka vow. We're having a little trouble with our internet, so those of you who watched it live may have seen it stop and start. And the Facebook version of it for the moment is a little clunky. We're going to repair it, or you can go to the YouTube channel and it'll broadcast without interruption. And we are hoping our internet is going to work today. We have no guarantees yet, but we'll see. Be patient with us, we're trying. So now we are into the last 4 articles after the vows. This one is called number 14, Departure or Dismissal of Members. You know, one thing that happens in a monastic order traditionally, and Ananda's no exception, because it's residential, people come in and they settle into the life, and maybe they invest themselves in it in such a way, either putting their resources into their own housing or in other ways, just make a commitment that often can last for many years. But for some people, in the Catholic Church, they called it, you lose your vocation, which somehow the inspiration which brought you to that level of spiritual commitment, for one reason or another, dries up. Now, it can dry up because of persistent insistence on holding to wrong attitudes, by closing yourself off from helpful guidance when it's offered, or by just a shift in karma. I know when Swamiji was talking to us, some of us who were just beginning to work in a wider world, helping bring people to this path, Swami wanted us to understand, as he put it, that only a few people have lifelong spiritual karma. That for most people, their period of spiritual enthusiasm has a beginning and an end that's shorter than the incarnation. And the reason Swami said this is he wanted us to understand that if people did not stay with the spiritual path, it wasn't necessarily our fault. It was just that they had that much enthusiasm and that much of a destiny, and then they had to go and do other things. So even those who make what they expect to be and sincerely believe will be a lifetime commitment sometimes find that for one reason or another, the energy for that way of life has run out. So a community has to have some realistic expectation that this can happen and some idea of how we're to work with it. So this is where Swami writes, it is possible for someone to resign from the Sevaka order and yet continue to reside in an Ananda community. In such an instance, however, the person must demonstrate that he or she is still in tune with the aims and ideals of Ananda. I'm trying to think if this has actually ever happened. I guess what Swami is, because he visualized Well, he imagined, visualized. What I mean by that wasn't that he had a visualization. It was rather that he could see. He saw Ananda communities developing on sort of parallel but compatible tracks. When he started the Sevaka monastic order, he did not presume that everybody who resided in the village would want to be part of the monastic order. But he wanted the monastic order to be there so that there would be a very strong core of highly committed spiritual people who would define the direction of the community. So even those who, and this is when in Swami, in his mind, when he visualized the time when cooperative spiritual communities would be enormously popular, and when living in an at Ananda village even, would have so many benefits that people who were less committed spiritually but still engaged with the Ananda ideals would find it to be a wonderful place to live, and they could be, happy contributing members to the whole thing. People, for example, who were there because of the schools wanted to have their children raised in that environment, or were good church members and really sadhaka members, but really not wanting to be monastic members. So he could see that you could perhaps join the monastic order and then realize that just really wasn't where you were spiritually, but still want to be part of Ananda, still be enthusiastic about its aims and ideals. Often Swamiji wrote things down or made statements or made suggestions that we just simply didn't understand. And it was either way before its time, way before its time in that some of them haven't even manifested, and he was just helping to set directions. Much of what Swamiji manifested in his life, Master had started but not succeeded in doing. How to live schools for children and the communities themselves were two things that Master started and then had to give up because he wasn't able to make them work. But Swami was able to make them work. So this picture of Ananda life was something that Swami often talked about, but we haven't yet seen it manifested. One of the things that Swamiji also wanted several things. He thought of having a magazine about universal spirituality. He really seriously thought that would be a wonderful project. These are just one, I'm mentioning two that I remember. He also thought of a parallel ministry, that right now the ministry of Ananda, the clergy of Ananda, comes out of the Sevaka order almost exclusively. But Swami imagined having training courses in being an Ananda minister. As he put it, he could imagine couples, for example, that maybe have retired from their main profession, but as an after-retirement career would like to open a small Ananda church somewhere and be the ministers, the pastors of that church. And it would be very good work for them, and they could do good work for other people. But they wouldn't be the same kind of ministers as those who were part of the monastic order, but it wouldn't close the ministry off to others who weren't. And Purushottama worked on that for a period of time, but it was an idea whose time had not yet come. So there can be many things that can happen that don't make sense to us now, but when we project into the future, they may. And then it says, should any member fall into negativity and darkness, and show himself, moreover, to be closed to the order's help, he must be asked to leave, both for his own sake and for the sake of those whom his attitude might otherwise infect. In such cases, the greatest compassion must always be shown. This has come about, there's only actually been one person that I can remember that Swamiji actually asked to leave. And it was before the Sevaka order was established. Maybe it was after. But in any case, first the person was given every opportunity to conform. And when he showed himself simply unwilling to conform to the most fundamental requirements of living in the community. And this was not, the person meditated a great deal and never turned away from the fundamental spiritual practices of the community, but he refused to contribute financially, refused to contribute in any way at all. And finally the community manager said to him, everybody here pays something financially for the running of the community, for all the services, for the payment of the mortgage and so on, and you haven't contributed a penny in over a decade. And he said, you must start contributing or find another place to live. So he decided to find another place to live. It's hard for me to think of any other circumstance in which a person was asked to leave, although there may have been some, because I haven't lived at Ananda village, which is where this would have taken place. Because usually when a person becomes that negative, they don't want to be there anymore. So it's not a hard problem. Sometimes it's a couple and only one of them has become negative, and that becomes much more complicated, which is why Swami says, in such cases, the greatest compassion must always be shown. In other words, Swami did not want us to fall into the kinds of things that happen in spiritual communities, where suddenly a vigilante group goes to the person and tells them that now you've been possessed of the devil and we're going to drive you out. He didn't want anything like that. When a person has made a spiritual effort, but for whatever reason has now fallen away from it, that's not the time to make it worse. That's the time to help them in any way you can to mitigate the inevitable disappointment that some part of them is feeling, which is often why people turn against the community. As Swami put it in another context, many, many, many people have passed through the doors of Ananda, and many, many people have lived in the communities for a time and then moved on. And Swami writes, for most of them, he said, it becomes an incident in their past that they, if they remember it all, they remember it either fondly or without much enthusiasm, but it's just a flow of the energy of their lives. There are some, however, as Swami puts it, for whom Ananda has such a powerful effect that they simply can't put it down. So even if they leave, they remain focused on it, but in a negative way. And in many cases, it's simply too obvious that because they failed to live up to the spiritual aspiration that they laid before themselves, they have to now say that it wasn't really my fault, it was the community that was wrong, or it was Kriyananda who was wrong, or some other person who was wrong. They have to make Ananda wrong. And this is the negativity Swami's speaking, merely to say it isn't for me anymore, or even to say, I don't like the direction of the community, I'm going to go somewhere else. I mean, it's a big world. People have the freedom to change their mind and have whatever opinions they want. But it's when they become active in their negativity. And not only do they feel negative, but they feel the need to tell everybody else everything that's wrong here. And this is where Swami says, and that's not good karma. Let me just put it in those terms. It's not good for your soul to have drawn spiritual energy, often have to have taken initiation, to have dedicated yourselves, and then to try to tear it down. If you don't like it, leave. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. If it no longer suits you, leave. That's just fine. But to try to pull the house down behind you, this is not good karma, because you've benefited. You've drawn from this. And even more profoundly, if you've taken an initiation and been sincere in what you did, and the people who have tried to help you have been sincere in trying to help you. Everybody's justified in their own mind, but you don't have to stand by and allow them to express whatever they think is right. So he says we have to save them from the bad karma of it, and we have to protect the community from the insidious effect of that kind of negativity. But the greatest compassion must be shown. no vindictiveness, no anger, even facilitate people's departure if we can. Departed members have the right to return to Ananda, provided they can show to the community's satisfaction that they have reformed. In other words, to be banned is not to be banned for life. If people are asked to leave because of certain attitudes and behaviors, and then later they repudiate those attitudes and behaviors, then these are our brothers and sisters. We all go through ups and downs, and we all get sucked into different points of view. And if we recognize, I don't know what I was thinking, but I don't feel that way anymore, I see it very differently. And Swami does say, though, to the community's satisfaction. It's not enough that the person says, oh, let me back in. In some context, and I don't know if it was these broadcasts or not, I was talking about an incident that I went through. It was the same person that I spoke of who chose to leave rather than make the minimum contribution. That person remained negative for a very long time and took very strong action during the years that we were in litigation to do what he could to pull down Ananda and to injure it. And then some well-meaning person brought that man and his wife back, not to the community, but to another location where I happened to be at the time, to sort of try to build a bridge. So the man and his wife walked in, and I said, yeah, sure, we can talk about universal forgiveness, and I'm perfectly all for it, but do you repudiate the actions that you took? Because the actions that you took were very, very hurtful to many people. Have you changed? Do you repudiate what you've done? And his wife said to me, we regret that people... No, she didn't say we regret. There was no personal responsibility. It's unfortunate that people were hurt. That was what she said. I said, I'm not going to accept that. That doesn't say anything. Do you repudiate the stance and the actions that you took? And are you willing to make reparations for what you did? And the answer was obviously no. I mean, no, they weren't. They hadn't repudiated anything. They hadn't changed at all. I said, well, then thank you very much. I'm not interested. I said, I would be a fool to take you back in. I just would be, I'm not that naive. Just invite you back in to start spreading negativity in all directions? No, thank you. I mean, they certainly weren't asking to move back, but it was even just to like reach out in friendship. It was a mockery. And sometimes we just have to take that stand. I bore them no ill will. I still don't. It's just, they made their choices, and I think their choices were unfortunate for them and not helpful to Ananda, but also very unfortunate for them. And out of friendship for them, I'm not going to act as if it's all just fine. Just because you come back and you say, let's play nice. Even more than that, they tried to make it seem like I was the narrow-minded one. I was the one who just couldn't let go of the past. No, absolutely not. But there is appropriate response. And Swami's saying in here, we can take a stand. Our service to our fellow man, God and our fellow man, includes being able to discern if someone is doing something that is very hurtful to them and potentially hurtful to other devotees. It's not only okay, it behooves us to stand up for what we know is to be true and to be maximum compassion, to be absolutely kind in it. But you can be kind and very stern at the same time, because our kindness is on a deeper level than just being nice. I often say there's 8 manifestations of God, and nice isn't one of them. Sometimes you just have to act with wisdom and with energy, and you can still act with love, but you can be definite about what you're doing. So if someone wants to come back, they can come back. There was a woman who behaved in a very treacherous way towards Swamiji, but he had been very loyal to her spiritually, but her treachery was quite dramatic and way too much. But I asked him, just out of curiosity, sir, if she reformed, really reformed, and really repudiated her mistakes, and wanted to come back to Ananda, would you take her back? He said, oh yes. But, and this was very interesting, now that I know that she's capable of that kind of treachery, he said, I would treat her differently, meaning he would be more cautious about trusting her, and he wouldn't just open all the same doors to her that had been opened before, because he knew that in her that she had treachery in her nature. I think he knew it before, but he was trying to save her from it. But now that he knows that she will, under stress, break that way, that he would set things up in such a way so as not to tempt her quite so much, or however you would put it, I don't know, because it never happened. It didn't. But in principle, it was interesting still, because it's exactly what he wrote here. We don't have to say, oh, you did the wrong thing, you can never come back. I've heard horrible stories about things like that, especially from very fundamentalist Western religious groups. One man was telling me, who grew up in a very tight-knit fundamentalist Christian church community in which behavior was really exactly so. And when he was a teenager, one of his teenage friends broke whatever their rules were. And that boy was simply shunned, literally. I mean, if he happened to be anywhere where any of all of these people who had been his friends and family, spiritual family for all his upbringing, they pretended he wasn't there. I mean, literally, they would just turn their backs on them. I can't conceive of anything so horrid. And so Swami wants us, the utmost compassion must be shown. He wants us to understand that we have nothing to fear and nothing to prove and nothing to gain with that kind of harshness. So this is the balance line that Swami's telling us to walk. We have to act appropriately, but with utmost compassion. The greatest compassion. If a member is asked to leave, it is suggested that the community offer to help him find a new life in the world, or help financially, or in finding a job or living situation. Wow, that pushes it pretty far, doesn't it? That we should even financially help someone get set up again, because at Ananda, these are choices that many of us made at a very young age. I came in my early 20s. I had nothing. I didn't really need anything. I've never been a materially ambitious person, so it wasn't a big sacrifice on my part at all. But the way I sort of jokingly put it is that none of us maximized our earning potential. We made the choice that this is especially the founding members of Ananda Village, we made the choice that we would use our youthful energy and our intelligence and whatever skills we had into building this one enterprise. I used to think of Ananda in those first 15 years or so as a giant mom and pop store. And my picture of that was that if mom and pop are running the corner store, which is just sort of an image that we understand in the West at least, they just put everything into it. Their living quarters might be above the shop, and they don't think about that I work from 9 to 5. They just realize that we have to make this enterprise work because this is all we have. And our future and the future of our family and our children, everything depends on this. And there's no separation between the work I'm doing and who I am. Now, of course, for someone like myself, that was 100% exactly what I'd been looking for. Master defined it as home, job, and church in one place, which was perfect. You have your spiritual life, you have your family life, and you have what people think of as their work, their job, and it's just all a seamless whole. This is one of the most profound blessings about these intentional communities, is that you have a completely integrated life. Now, that model has not been successfully carried into all our communities because it's an extremely difficult one to create. And Swamiji was extraordinary in his ability to just keep manifesting enterprises and ideas and initiatives that would keep generating income and make it possible for us to have home, job, and church in one place. But in doing that, in making that successful, and many of the founding members were living a monastic life at that time, formally as monks and nuns, although at a certain point much of that monastic order dissolved and many of those monks and nuns became householders. But even as monks and nuns, the ability to completely surrender any thought of what was going to come back to me was easily possible. And it was partly because of that very, very strong monastic renunciate core that Ananda village, which is to say the whole enterprise of Ananda, was able to be started. But a person could work for many years and simply have nothing to show for it. And it's still true, there are many people within Ananda who have dedicated a lifetime of service to God, and their personal possessions or their income, their financial resources are virtually nil. And in fact, most of the people at Ananda village past the age of 50 or 60 who have any kind of a fund, generally speaking, inherited it because we just didn't earn it. It just wasn't there. And that was the level of commitment. However, if you've been doing that for 25 or 30 years, and you really feel the karmic need to withdraw, it's quite possible that you'll have nothing at all to start a new life with, but you're not 20 years old anymore. So one of the things that happens that's highly unfortunate in monastic communities is that people lose their vocation, but they have no means with which to separate from that monastic community, and they become a downward pulling vortex of energy. So it's also to the benefit of the community to facilitate the transfer of these people into another way of life. And so Swami wants us to understand that this is also, it's a way of expressing gratitude. If someone has been a dedicated member and has given their energy with very little return for many years, but now feels the need to move elsewhere, it's a way of saying delayed remuneration. It's a way of saying thank you for all your years of service. And now let us at least, and if we don't have the actual resources to really change their destiny, at least even symbolically, something can be given to help. And see, this is also, again, Swami's talking about the attitude that we have toward those who depart, which is kindly and serviceful and grateful for years of friendship shared, rather than vindictive and angry and condemning. So that's why Swami took the trouble, departure or dismissal of members. Dismissal only in extreme circumstances, departure with as much charity as is possible. Now, thinking of this as the Ananda way of life, this is simply saying, what do you do when people wrong you in your life? What do you do when circumstances change and commitments that were expected to be lifelong can't be maintained? With the greatest compassion possible, which is with as much service as is possible, much support and service, and if people genuinely reform, to be willing to reconsider and take them back. All exceedingly important principles. God bless you, my friends.